The room was supposed to be quiet in the comforting way, like a library with soft lights. The kind of quiet where you can hear the air conditioner exhale and the paper sheet beneath you crinkle every time you shift your hips. The ultrasound gel was cold on my stomach, and the wand moved in slow, practiced circles while the machine hummed like a tired refrigerator. I stared at the monitor the way people stare at weather maps, searching for meaning in shapes they don't yet understand. And then the sound came through. Steady, fast, unmistakable. My baby's heartbeat. That staccato rhythm that makes your own pulse trip over itself, because suddenly your body is not just your body, and the future has a sound. Dr. Klein's voice had been warm when she greeted me, the kind of voice that made you relax even while half naked under fluorescent lights. She'd asked about nausea, sleep, the tiny indignities of pregnancy. She'd told me my blood work looked fine. She'd even smiled when I joked that I'd started crying at dog food commercials. And then she went silent. Not the brief, thoughtful silence of a professional concentrating, but a longer one that made the hairs on my arms rise. Her eyes narrowed at the screen. She adjusted the probe, typed something, adjusted again. The heartbeat kept tapping away, bright and insistent, while her jaw tightened as though she'd bitten down on a secret. "Everything okay?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light, as if I were asking about the weather. Dr. Klein didn't answer right away. She reached for the printer, then stopped. She looked toward the door, then back at the screen, and the smile she'd worn earlier had vanished like it had never existed. Her hand hovered over the keyboard, trembling just slightly, and I remember thinking, absurdly, that she should eat something, that maybe she was overworked, that doctors were human. Then she did something I had never seen a doctor do in an exam room. She shut it all off. The humming stopped. The screen went black. The heartbeat vanished mid-beat, as if someone had cut a cord. For a second I felt like I couldn't breathe, like the absence of that sound meant the absence of my baby, and I sat up so fast the paper tore. "Dr. Klein?" I said, my voice sharper now. She didn't look at me at first. She pulled the curtain aside just enough to check the hallway. Then she closed it again and leaned in close, lowering her voice as if the walls had ears. "You need to leave," she said. I blinked at her, confused in that slow, stupid way fear makes you. "Leave? Why? Is something wrong with the baby?" Her eyes met mine, and the look in them was not medical concern. It was urgency. It was pity wrapped in something harder. "Your baby is fine," she said, and the way she said it made me believe her. "But you are not safe." I stared at her like she'd spoken in another language. "What are you talking about?" Dr. Klein exhaled, a quick, controlled breath, as though she was trying to stay calm for both of us. She reached for my chart, then thought better of it, and pushed it away like it was contaminated. Her hands were steady again now, but her voice was still tight. "I'm going to say this once, and I need you to listen," she said. "When you leave this room, you do not call your husband. You do not go home. You do not tell anyone you were here. Do you understand me?" My throat went dry. "My husband is in the waiting room," I said, because it was the most obvious fact, the one that should have made her slow down and explain herself properly. "Evan is right outside. He took off work. He's been excited all week. He's the reason I'm telling you to run." Dr. Klein cut in, and the word run landed heavy, like a door slamming in a house that suddenly didn't feel like yours. I stared at her, and my mind tried to reorganize itself around that sentence. Evan was the man who warmed my car on cold mornings. Evan was the man who held my hair back when I threw up. Evan was the man my mother didn't trust, And I defended anyway, because my mother had always been suspicious of charm, always believed it was a disguise. Dr. Klein lowered her voice further. I saw something on the ultrasound, she said, and then, before I could react, she corrected herself. Not on the ultrasound, in the identifiers, in the attached orders. What orders? I asked, and my stomach tightened in a way that had nothing to do with pregnancy. She reached into a drawer and pulled out a paper slip, thin, ordinary, the kind of thing you could lose in the bottom of a purse. She held it between us like evidence at a trial. This imaging request, she said. The one that came in ahead of your appointment. It's not standard. It's not normal. I tried to focus on the print, but my eyes kept catching on the same words, the ones my brain refused to interpret. There was my name, my date of birth, my insurance number, and then, in a small section labeled additional notes, something typed in all caps that made my blood go cold. Paternity discretion required. Patient may be unreliable. I blinked hard. What is this? I whispered. Dr. Klein's expression didn't soften. Your husband submitted that, she said, and then she swallowed. And he attached legal language. Legal language, I repeated, like an echo. Why would... She didn't let me finish. Because he's building a case, she said quietly. And he's doing it using your pregnancy. I felt like the room tilted. The paper crinkled under my hands as I gripped the edge of the bed. A case for what? My voice came out too high, too thin. We're married. We've been trying for a baby for 2 years. Dr. Klein's gaze held mine. There's more. She turned slightly, as if deciding whether to cross a line, and then she did. I don't usually break protocol, she said. But I have to live with myself after this, and if I don't tell you, I'm complicit. The word complicit made my skin prickle. She opened another file, one not in my chart, one with a different header. I caught a glimpse of a name before she covered it with her hand. This is from a fertility clinic, she said. A clinic you were never registered with. My chest tightened. I've never been to a fertility clinic. I know, she said. But your husband has. The room went quiet again, but not comforting. The silence felt sharp, like glass. Dr. Klein leaned in closer. Your blood type, she said. And his blood type. The embryo transfer notes. The timing. It doesn't match what he told you. And the authorization forms were signed in your name. I stared at her hand on the file. Are you saying... My voice faltered. Are you saying he forged my signature? Dr. Klein didn't answer with words. She answered with a look that said the truth was already standing in the room with us. My mouth went numb. I thought about Evan's gentle smile when he brought me prenatal vitamins. I thought about his mother, Marlene, who had called me lucky to have found a man like her son. I thought about the way his family had always spoken to me, as if I'd been borrowed from someone else's world, as if the only reason I belonged in their lives was because Evan had decided I could. I had ignored so much. The small jokes about my inheritance family, the way Marlene asked too many questions about my grandfather's land, the way Evan always insisted we keep my father's estate documents organized, as if he cared about my stress levels more than the paper itself. The way he'd smiled when I told him my father had named me executor, not my cousins, not my uncles, but me. I swallowed hard. What does this have to do with my divorce? I asked, because my mind still wanted a logical path, something neat and explainable. Dr. Klein's voice was low and steady. Because if he can establish doubt, she said, if he can paint you as unstable or dishonest, He can take everything. Custody, property, your family assets. And if he has already forged your name once. She paused, and that pause was its own warning. He'll do it again. The air in my lungs felt heavy. But why would he rig my pregnancy? I asked, and even as I said it, the question sounded impossible, like something from a movie I would never watch because it felt too cruel to be entertainment. Dr. Klein looked down at the paper in my hands. Because a pregnancy is leverage, she said, and because he thinks you won't fight while you're scared. I sat there with gel drying on my skin, the paper trembling between my fingers, and I heard the faint murmur of voices in the hallway. Pleasant, casual, normal. Evan's voice, laughing softly at something. The sound of a man who had nothing to fear. Dr. Klein reached for my wrist. Her grip was gentle, but firm. Listen to me, she said. There's a back exit by the nurse's station. I can have someone walk you out. You take your phone, you take your purse, and you go somewhere he can't follow you. Someone you trust. Someone he doesn't control. My mind flashed to my mother, stubborn and watchful, the woman I'd argued with for years because she never liked Evan. My mother who had once said quietly, "He wants what you have, sweetheart, not just you." I swallowed. My throat hurt. "If I leave," I whispered, "he'll know." Dr. Klein's voice was almost a plea. "If you stay," she said, "he'll have time." Then the door handle turned. Dr. Klein stepped back fast, her face rearranging itself into professional calm in a way that was almost frightening to watch, like an actress slipping into character. The door opened, and Evan's head appeared around the corner, smiling bright, holding my coat like he was a hero in a small domestic story. "Hey," he said warmly. "How did it go? Did you see the heartbeat? Can I come in?" I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time in my marriage, I saw two versions of the same man layered over each other. The husband who rubbed my back when I cried. The strategist who wrote patient may be unreliable about me in a medical order. The man who smiled and carried my coat while a trap tightened around my life. And I realized, with a strange, cold clarity, that Dr. Klein wasn't being dramatic. She was begging me for a reason. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Because the truth wasn't just that Evan had betrayed me. It was how long he'd been planning it, and who had helped him, and what he thought my baby would buy him when the time came to claim what he believed I didn't deserve to keep. And it started long before that ultrasound screen went black. I left through the back hallway with my coat folded over my arm and my purse clutched so tightly my knuckles ached, moving past nurses who didn't look at me twice, and a bulletin board covered in pastel flyers about prenatal yoga and nutrition classes I would never attend. And every step felt like I was walking out of one life and into another without any ceremony to mark the change. The automatic door sighed open. The cold air slapped my face, and I didn't stop walking until I was 3 blocks away, standing beside my car with my phone buzzing in my hand like it was alive. Evan had already texted twice. "Where did you go?" followed by, "Did I miss something?" The punctuation was casual, affectionate even, and that was the part that made my stomach twist, because he didn't know yet that the ground had shifted, that the version of me who would answer those messages no longer existed. I drove to my mother's house without calling first, muscle memory taking over, hands steady on the wheel while my thoughts raced ahead. And when she opened the door and saw my face, she didn't ask what was wrong. She just stepped aside and let me in like she'd been expecting this moment for years. I sat at her kitchen table while she poured tea neither of us drank, and when I told her everything, about the ultrasound, the paper, the forged signature. She listened without interrupting, her mouth set in a line so familiar it almost hurt. "I warned you," she said finally, and there was no triumph in her voice, only exhaustion. "I warned you he was too interested in things that weren't his." I wanted to argue. I wanted to defend him out of habit, to say she was being unfair, but the words wouldn't come, because once you see a pattern, you can't unsee it, and suddenly every small moment rearranges itself into something damning. The way Evan insisted on being present when my father's lawyer called. The way he volunteered to help organize estate documents. The way his mother asked, again and again, what would happen to the land if something happened to me. By the time Evan showed up at my mother's door, the sun had dipped low enough to stain the windows orange, and he stood on the porch with his hands open like he was offering peace, his face carefully arranged into concern. My mother didn't invite him in. She didn't have to say anything. The silence did the work for her. "What's going on?" Evan asked me, looking between us, his voice gentle but edged with irritation, the way it always was when things didn't go according to his plan. "You disappeared. Dr. Klein wouldn't tell me anything. You scared me." I met his eyes and said nothing, and that was when the first crack appeared, a flicker of something sharp passing through his expression before the smile returned, just a beat too late. "I need space," I said finally, and my voice sounded steadier than I felt. "I'm staying here for a while." His brow furrowed in practiced confusion. "Because of your mother?" he asked, and there it was, the subtle wedge he always used, the suggestion that my family was the problem. "You know how she gets." My mother laughed once, a dry sound that cut through the air. "Leave," she said simply. "Before you say something you can't take back." Evan's jaw tightened. "This is my wife," he said, turning to me, lowering his voice as if we were sharing something private. "And that's my child she's carrying. We don't keep secrets like this." I thought of the paper in the exam room. Patient may be unreliable. I thought of the forged signature. I thought of the way he'd smiled when he handed me my coat. "We already do," I said, and watched him realize, in real time, that he had lost control of the conversation. He left without another word, his footsteps sharp on the porch steps, and my phone lit up with messages the moment his car pulled away. Apologies and confusion layered with just enough frustration to remind me who he really was. I didn't answer. Instead, I slept for 3 hours straight, the kind of sleep that comes when your body shuts down because it has no other option. The next morning, the escalation began. My bank called first, asking to confirm a transfer I hadn't authorized. Then my father's lawyer emailed, politely inquiring about a change request that had come in overnight regarding the estate trust. Then my cousin texted, asking why Evan had told her I was not in a good place and might need help managing my responsibilities. By noon, it was clear that Evan wasn't panicking. He was advancing. I sat at my mother's dining table with a legal pad and started writing everything down, dates and times and names, the way my father had taught me when something didn't feel right, and with each entry, the picture sharpened. Evan wasn't reacting to my disappearance. He was executing a plan that had been waiting for a trigger. My absence simply gave him justification. The first piece of the hidden truth surfaced when my father's lawyer came by in person, his expression carefully neutral as he spread documents across the table. Documents I had never seen before, but recognized immediately by the signature at the bottom. My signature, precise and unmistakable, copied so well it made my skin crawl. "These came in last month," he said gently, requesting contingency changes in the event of incapacity. "Incapacity," I repeated, the word heavy on my tongue. He nodded. There was concern expressed by your husband about your mental state. Pregnancy-related anxiety, he said. He was very convincing. I laughed then, a low, incredulous sound that startled even me. Of course he was, I said. He's been practicing. The lawyer's eyes flicked to my mother, then back to me. I didn't execute anything, he said quickly. Something didn't sit right. That's why I wanted to see you. When he left, I locked the door behind him and leaned against it, my hands shaking now that the adrenaline had nowhere to go. Evan hadn't just planned to discredit me. He had laid the groundwork to replace me. Executor, decision-maker, mother. That afternoon, Evan's mother called, her voice syrupy with concern, asking if I was taking care of myself, suggesting gently that stress wasn't good for the baby, that perhaps it would be wise to let Evan handle things until I felt better. I listened without interrupting, filing away every word, every implication, the quiet alignment between mother and son suddenly unmistakable. When I hung up, my mother watched me from across the room. They think you're weak, she said. I nodded. They think I'm quiet, I corrected. There's a difference. That night, alone in my childhood bedroom, I opened my laptop and did something Evan never expected me to do, something he had always assumed I wouldn't bother with because he believed I trusted him too much to check. I went through every shared account, every email thread, every cloud folder, and I followed the paper trail the way I had been taught, slowly, patiently, without emotion clouding my judgment. What I found wasn't dramatic. There were no secret lovers or violent threats. There were spreadsheets, timelines, drafts of legal language saved under innocuous file names, a folder labeled Future, tucked away like a private joke, containing scanned documents and notes about leverage, about credibility, about timing, about me. The turning point didn't come with a scream or a breakdown. It came with a quiet, devastating understanding. Evan hadn't married me for love alone. He had married into a legacy he believed should be his, and he had underestimated the woman standing between him and it. I closed the laptop and lay back on the bed, one hand resting over my stomach, feeling the faint, reassuring presence beneath my palm, and for the first time since the ultrasound room, I allowed myself to cry, not from fear, but from clarity, because now I knew what he was doing, and knowing that changed everything. The first real shift didn't come from anger or courage or some sudden burst of confidence. It came from routine, from the habit of being thorough when everything else feels unstable, and that was the part Evan never understood about me, because he mistook my calm for passivity and my silence for compliance. I spent 3 days at my mother's dining table with a blanket around my shoulders and my laptop open, not searching for something dramatic, not hoping for a smoking gun, but simply following patterns the way my father had taught me when numbers didn't add up and people spoke too quickly. The ally appeared quietly, disguised as an inconvenience. It was my obstetric nurse, Lydia, calling from the clinic to check on me, her voice hesitant in a way that immediately set my instincts humming. She said, "Doctor, Klein had been asking about me, that she wanted to make sure I was safe, and then, after a pause that stretched just long enough to mean something, Lydia mentioned that there had been a system error during my appointment, a duplicate file attached to my record that shouldn't have been there. I'm not supposed to do this," she said carefully, "but I made a copy before IT wiped it." My fingers tightened around the phone. "Why?" I asked. "Because I've seen men like your husband before," she said, and there was no hesitation now. "And because when a woman disappears mid-appointment, it usually means someone else wants to control the story." She emailed the file to a secure address my mother's neighbor had helped me set up, an old-school cybersecurity consultant who owed my father a favor and didn't ask questions. And when I opened it that night, I felt something settle in my chest, something solid and steady. The file wasn't emotional. It wasn't even damning on its own. It was procedural, authorizations, metadata, timestamps, and a name, not Evans, a fertility specialist listed as the primary contact for embryo storage, a clinic across town I had never stepped foot in, and beside it a series of notes about donor material, controlled timing, and maternal compliance, language that made my stomach turn because it stripped something sacred down to a strategy. The most unsettling part wasn't the deception. It was the confidence. Evan hadn't hidden this well because he feared discovery. He had hidden it well because he assumed discovery wouldn't matter. The major secret surfaced slowly, piece by piece, the way truth often does when it's been buried under bureaucracy instead of lies, and it flipped everything I thought I understood about my marriage. Evan hadn't rigged my pregnancy on impulse, or panic, or desperation. He had planned it as a mechanism, a way to create leverage over my body and my credibility at the same time, and when I traced the donor records back through public databases with the neighbor's help, the picture sharpened into something unmistakable. The donor wasn't anonymous. He was Evan's cousin, a man with a documented history of financial trouble, a man whose signature appeared on several consulting agreements in Evan's files, agreements that suddenly looked less like business and more like hush money. Evan hadn't just engineered a pregnancy. He had engineered a narrative, one in which he could later question paternity, question my honesty, and paint himself as the reasonable husband burdened by an unstable wife, carrying a child of questionable origin. The loss came with that realization, quiet but profound, because whatever illusions I still held about love evaporated completely, and I grieved them without ceremony, without tears at first, the way you grieve something that was never quite real. I grieved the man I thought he was. I grieved the future I had defended him against. I grieved the version of myself who believed loyalty was protection. And then I started moving. With my mother's help, I retained a lawyer who specialized in high-conflict divorces, a woman with sharp eyes and a voice that never rose, and when I laid everything out on her desk, she didn't gasp or clutch her pearls or tell me how awful it all was. She simply nodded and said, "He overreached." That was the phrase that anchored me. He overreached. We filed quietly, strategically, requesting temporary protections without explanation, letting Evan believe he was still ahead, still controlling the pace, and that was when his arrogance began to betray him in ways I couldn't have orchestrated if I tried. He sent emails meant to intimidate that instead documented his assumptions. He leaned on family members who grew careless with their words. He filed motions prematurely, exposing inconsistencies in the story he was trying to sell. The turning point arrived not in a courtroom, but in a deposition prep session, when my lawyer slid a single document across the table and asked me if I recognized the handwriting in the margins. I did. Evans. Notes he had written to himself, reminders about timeline pressure and medical credibility, scanned and saved without stripping the metadata, his confidence blinding him to the basics. I felt the baby move then, a small, steady flutter, and I placed my hand over my stomach without thinking, grounding myself in the reality he couldn't manipulate away. "He thinks I'll fold," I said quietly. My lawyer smiled, just slightly. "He thinks you'll panic," she corrected. "Men like this always confuse silence with surrender." The major loss came shortly after, when Evan froze our shared accounts and attempted to have me declared temporarily unfit due to emotional distress, citing my disappearance from the clinic and my refusal to communicate. And for one long night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of how close he had come to succeeding, how narrow the margin between safety and catastrophe really was. I didn't romanticize that fear. I let it sharpen me. The ally network expanded organically, not with grand gestures, but with small, decisive acts. Lydia testifying to procedural irregularities, the fertility clinic administrator confirming forged authorizations, my father's lawyer submitting a sworn statement about attempted manipulation, each piece fitting into place without drama. No one raised their voice. No one needed to. By the time Evan realized the ground beneath him was unstable, it was too late to retreat without exposing himself further. And that was the moment I understood something essential about power, something no one had ever taught me because they assumed I didn't need to know it. Power doesn't announce itself. It accumulates quietly, in preparation and patience, and the refusal to rush. On the eve of the hearing that would determine temporary custody and asset control, Evan sent me one final message, longer than the others, full of wounded language and selective memory, reminding me of vows and loyalty and the stress I was putting on our family. I read it once, then archived it without responding, my hand resting on my stomach, my breathing slow and even. Because the truth was no longer fragile, it was documented. And for the first time since the ultrasound screen went black, I didn't feel like I was running. I felt like I was ready. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, not grand or dramatic, just a functional space with worn wooden benches and fluorescent lights that hummed softly overhead. And that ordinariness was what made it terrifying, because there was no theater to hide behind. No grand gestures that would distract from facts once they were laid bare. I arrived early, my lawyer beside me, my mother a quiet presence just behind, and I sat with my hands folded over my stomach, breathing slowly, reminding myself that this moment had been built carefully, deliberately, not rushed into on a wave of anger. Evan came in last, confident as ever, his suit perfectly pressed, his expression arranged into something halfway between concern and martyrdom. And when he saw me, his eyes flicked briefly to my belly, before settling into a practiced sadness, the look of a man prepared to be patient with a difficult wife. His attorney nodded politely in my direction, unaware, I suspected, of how much her client had chosen not to share with her. The judge entered. We stood. We sat. The air shifted. Evan's attorney spoke first, painting a careful picture of instability and concern, of a husband worried about his wife's mental health during pregnancy, of sudden disappearances and refusals to communicate, of the need for temporary safeguards to protect assets and ensure the child's well-being. She spoke smoothly, confidently, and for a moment I understood how Evan had gotten as far as he had, how easy it was to believe a story delivered with the right tone and posture. Then my lawyer stood. She didn't argue. She didn't dramatize. She asked permission to submit documentation. What followed was not a single devastating reveal, but a sequence, a slow tightening of a net that had been woven long before this morning. She began with medical records, not interpretations, just timestamps and authorization trails, demonstrating that requests had been submitted in my name from IP addresses traced back to Evan's office, something his attorney frowned at before quickly schooling her expression. Then came the fertility clinic administrator's affidavit, calm and precise, explaining forged consent forms and unauthorized embryo handling, language so clinical it stripped the act of any romantic pretense. Evan shifted in his seat for the first time. The judge leaned forward slightly. My lawyer continued, introducing deposition excerpts from Evan himself, his own words contradicting one another in subtle but unmistakable ways, statements about timelines that did not align, explanations that changed depending on the question, arrogance creeping into the margins. When Lydia's sworn statement was entered, detailing procedural anomalies and her decision to preserve the duplicate file, Evan's attorney objected, her voice sharper now, but the objection was overruled. The room grew very quiet. The climax did not arrive with a raised voice or a dramatic accusation. It arrived with metadata. My lawyer projected a document onto the screen, one Evan had submitted himself, believing it harmless, and highlighted the handwritten notes in the margins, the ones he had never intended anyone else to see. The judge adjusted her glasses, studying the annotations, the timestamps, the file history that placed those notes firmly in Evan's hands weeks before the ultrasound appointment. There was a pause. Not an awkward one, a deliberate one. Evan leaned toward his attorney and whispered something urgently. She shook her head, almost imperceptibly. When the judge spoke, her voice was even. "Mr. Harris," she said, "can you explain why you were making contingency plans regarding your wife's credibility prior to any documented concerns?" Evan stood, smoothing his jacket, the confidence faltering just enough to be visible. "I was under a lot of stress," he said. "I was trying to protect my family." "And by family?" the judge asked. "You mean?" "My child," he said quickly, and then, realizing too late what he had done, added, "Our child." The judge's gaze did not waver. "That remains to be determined," she said. The greatest challenge was not the evidence itself. It was sitting there, listening to the man I had shared a life with attempt to salvage a narrative in real time, watching him grasp for sympathy he believed he was owed, and resisting the urge to speak, to correct, to defend myself emotionally. Everything in me wanted to explain who I was, to insist on my own sanity, my own integrity. I didn't. I stayed still. The decisive move was restraint. When my lawyer called me to the stand, it was brief. She asked about my disappearance from the clinic. I explained calmly that a medical professional had expressed concern for my safety and advised me to leave. I described seeking refuge with my mother. I did not speculate on Evan's motives. I did not name betrayal. I stated facts, dates, actions taken. Evan's attorney attempted to rattle me, asking about stress, about fear, about whether pregnancy hormones had affected my judgment, and I answered evenly, not denying emotion, but refusing to let it define my credibility. I watched the judge's pen move steadily across her notepad, and I understood that the truth does not need volume to be heard. When Evan took the stand, the room changed again. His voice wavered just slightly as he spoke about love and concern, about misunderstanding and intention, and then my lawyer asked him about the fertility clinic. "Have you ever attended this clinic?" she asked. He hesitated. "Yes." "Without your wife?" "Yes." "And did you sign documents on her behalf?" "No." She held up the forms. "Can you explain the match between your handwriting and these signatures?" He opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. "I can't account for that." The judge's pen stopped. Everything seemed to slow then, as though the room itself was waiting. Evan's face flushed, his composure slipping, the careful construction of his image collapsing under the weight of specifics he could no longer sidestep. When the donor records were introduced, the familial connection made explicit, a murmur rippled through the courtroom, quickly silenced, but the damage was done. The judge recessed briefly. 10 minutes stretched into 30. My hands rested over my stomach, my breath steady, my mother's hand warm on my shoulder. When the judge returned, Her ruling was measured, precise, devastating in its clarity. Temporary sole custody pending further review, exclusive control of my inherited assets, an order for a full forensic audit, a referral to the district attorney regarding potential fraud. Evan's face drained of color. There was no outburst, no shouting. He simply sat there, stunned, the weight of consequence settling over him in a way no argument could lift. His attorney leaned in, whispering urgently now, her tone very different from when the morning began. I didn't look at him as we stood to leave. The climax had passed, not with spectacle, but with the quiet authority of facts finally arranged in the right order. And as I walked out of that courtroom, I understood something with a clarity that surprised me. He hadn't lost because I fought harder. He lost because he believed I wouldn't fight at all. The aftermath didn't come with fireworks or applause. It came quietly, in increments, the way real consequences always do, unfolding over weeks instead of minutes, measured not by headlines, but by paperwork and silence. Evan stopped texting after the ruling. Not immediately. There were a few half-hearted messages routed through his attorney, carefully neutral, stripped of emotion. But the personal tone vanished, and with it the illusion that he still believed he could talk his way back into my life. I moved into a small rental near my mother's house. Nothing sentimental, just clean lines and sunlight in the mornings, and I unpacked slowly, deliberately, choosing what to keep and what to leave boxed, understanding for the first time that starting over didn't require erasing everything, only the parts that no longer belonged to me. I attended my prenatal appointments with a new doctor, one who read my file carefully and never looked at me like I was fragile, and when I heard my baby's heartbeat again, steady and strong, I didn't cry. I smiled. It felt earned. The investigation progressed the way investigations do, methodical and unglamorous, auditors tracing money, prosecutors reviewing timelines, people who had once spoken confidently now choosing their words with care. Evan's mother stopped calling. His cousin's consulting contracts disappeared from public records. Small shifts, but unmistakable ones. The world was adjusting to the truth, however reluctantly. What surprised me most was not how much I had lost, but how much I had been carrying without realizing it. The constant vigilance, the quiet self-doubt, the work of translating myself into someone easier to accept. Without Evan's presence, my life grew simpler, not emptier, and that simplicity felt like relief. I slept better. I ate better. I trusted my own instincts without second-guessing them into silence. People asked me if I felt vindicated. The word never quite fit. Vindication implies a hunger for recognition, a need for others to admit they were wrong. What I felt instead was alignment. My life finally matched the truth I had been living quietly for years. The mismatch had been exhausting. On the day the divorce was finalized, I stood in a hallway that smelled faintly of cleaning solution and old paper, holding a folder with my name on it. Just my name. No hyphens, no shared identity. And when the clerk handed me the stamped documents, she smiled politely and moved on to the next person in line, unaware that she had just returned something priceless to me. Ownership, agency, self. I thought about forgiveness then, the way people always do, the way they expect you to, and I realized something that felt both radical and simple. Forgiveness is not a requirement for healing. It's a choice, and some choices are not owed. I didn't wish Evan harm. I didn't dwell on his future. I released him from my attention entirely, which felt far more final than anger ever could. As my pregnancy progressed, I spent long afternoons walking familiar streets, letting my mind wander, imagining the kind of mother I wanted to be, not perfect or endlessly patient, but honest, observant, willing to pause before reacting, willing to teach by example that strength does not need to announce itself to be real. I planned for a future that was mine alone to design, one grounded in clarity rather than compromise. Sometimes, late at night, I thought back to that ultrasound room, to the moment the screen went black and the world split in two, and I understood now that it hadn't been an ending, it had been an interruption, a necessary one, sharp and frightening, and ultimately merciful. If Dr. Klein hadn't trusted her instincts, if Lydia hadn't copied that file, if I hadn't listened instead of rationalizing, the path could have narrowed in ways I might not have escaped. Pain rewires you, but so does attention. Paying attention saved me. When my child is born, they will not inherit fear or silence. They will inherit truth. They will grow up knowing that family is not defined by blood alone, nor by vows spoken too early or promises made for the wrong reasons, but by consistency, respect, and the courage to leave when something no longer honors who you are. I didn't win because I destroyed someone else. I won because I kept myself, and that is a victory no one can ever take back.